Star Wars only, I don't know what the fuck your problem is.
As the Star Wars sequels finally wrap up this December of 2019 with The Rise of Skywalker, the final episodic film in the Skywalker saga, we're going to hear a lot more about the actors on the behind-the-scenes stuff and what they really felt. And we're going to be hearing this for the next 20, 30, 40 years of our lives, my friends. So we're going to be in this for the long haul. But Anthony Daniels is a rare breed in the Star Wars universe, as being one of the only people who have lived and been in every single Star Wars movie since 1977. And that's a whole nother story of itself. But he finally comes out and talks about his disappointment with basically the last 6 films that he's been involved with in the Star Wars saga. And specifically, The Last Jedi was the most controversial one of late and the one that has a lot of fans divided. And he talks about that. He says, well, yes, I do understand why the fans are unhappy. It speaks to a devotion that they care so much that they mind if someone messes with it. I understand people being critical of the films. He even talks about the situation that Mark Hamill was in with The Last Jedi in Episode 7, and Daniel says, I know it has been particularly difficult for him lately because the new movies haven't given him much to do. I certainly recognize that and can relate to it. In these new movies, I have felt like a table decoration, and that is difficult because I recognize this character C-3PO is worth so much more, but I understand that it is a whole film, not a feature about C-3PO. That's just my personal disappointment. I get paid whether or not he does anything, but it would be nice for him to have a purpose. And as an actor, this is classic. This is what most actors feel when their characters have been a little underplayed. But since the prequels, since The Phantom Menace, C-3PO has been a table decoration, someone who's just kind of there because you remember. And in The Phantom Menace, it was very shoehorned in of, oh, hey, little Annie built C-3PO. Isn't that cute? And a lot of fans were like, oh, what? Okay, sure. And it just didn't feel like the character that we knew from the original trilogy. And when the sequel trilogy came out, it was even worse because he was almost a background character and did become what he's saying, a table decoration. And Daniels goes on to talk about his disappointment with the prequel trilogy when they were filming that. He says, it was certainly a bit weird in the prequels, but I accepted the storylines were very different. I'm very glad to be there, although they weren't much that fun to do. And you can see that when you watch the films. In the original trilogy, R2-D2 and C-3PO are meant to be like the lowest class you could have in the Star Wars universe. So the droids that no one absolutely cares about, but the entire story revolves around them. You kind of follow these two who are meant to be low-class people, or droids, whatever you want to call them, that not a lot of people but Luke Skywalker respect. And as they go on their adventure, you see the world around them have this grander story to tell. And in the original trilogy, specifically New Hope, that was kind of the point. And that's what Lucas was doing, is taking the story from a very low-class perspective of the droids, and he gets this from directors that he was very fond of. I can't remember his name, but I think it was a Japanese or Chinese director that he was very fond of, did this style of directing way back in the day. And so Lucas tried to mimic that with the original trilogy. And you see that with the original trilogy of R2-D2 and C-3PO. They're kind of the characters you follow along with to see the story through their eyes and what they're going through. But you also see the grander story that surrounds them. You don't have that in the prequel trilogy. In the prequel trilogy, it was, oh, hey, you remember these two? Well, you remember them because Annie built one of them, and R2-D2 is going to get a wipe down from Padme because he saved the ship. Stupid stuff like that was very shoehorned in. Then you get the sequel trilogy, and it doesn't even shoehorn them in, it just shows them there, kind of for convenience. And with R2-D2 specifically at the end of The Force Awakens, it was, oh, he's awake now. He wasn't awake the rest of the film, but he's awake now. It's understandable why people like Anthony Daniels are disappointed with his role in the sequel trilogy and in the prequel trilogy, and I've been waiting since the prequels for him to kind of finally come out and talk about his disappointment and his involvement with these films. But to be fair, Anthony Daniels has never really been entirely happy with his role in the Star Wars universe. Even after 1977's A New Hope, he was a little disappointed that Lucas didn't give him a bigger cut of the money, because Lucas was very gracious with the money that that film made and gave people like Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, and Harrison Ford cuts of the movie, like percentage-wise, and they made a lot of money off that. Anthony Daniels was a little disappointed that he didn't get that. But you gotta think, looking in hindsight, the amount of personal pain and torture this man had to go through when making the original Star Wars films. I mean, he can get into that suit now that they have for C-3PO relatively easy, and it's improved a lot. But back in 1977, when they were making, or a little bit before that, in 75 and 76, when they were making Star Wars, it was very difficult to get into that C-3PO costume. It would cut him up when he was on the inside. It was hot because you're in the desert. Personally, a little claustrophobic, and so I couldn't imagine being into an entire suit like that. Having to act, having to talk, and be in this desert when it's really hot. You're in this big metal suit thing, and it's cutting you up and everything, and you can't even scratch your fucking balls or anything, man. That would suck. And so I really appreciate all the effort that he's gone through, and I think he deserves the luxury of a career that he's had so far. I mean, he's made his entire life off of Star Wars, and rightfully so, just off of the pain and suffering that he went through just making the original film. But it does suck looking back now and seeing the treatment that his character has gotten in the prequels and the sequel trilogy. But it's nice to know that finally, I want to end this on a positive note, that in The Rise of Skywalker, he's actually getting a major arc. He says at the end of this interview, he says, C-3PO has a major arc. I am very satisfied with what I had to do in this movie, and I am very satisfied with everything I know about this movie. And I know he can't reveal too much about it, but I even had someone who's familiar with the situation of Star Wars Episode 9 and the ins and outs of it, and told me, you really want to pay attention to C-3PO, because he has a huge arc and role in the next film, and I'm happy with that. I think this is Lucasfilm, and specifically J.J. Abrams, realizing the original trilogy characters have kind of oddly taken a back seat while also being on the main part of the ride for the sequel trilogy, and this is kind of the way to say, well, we're going to remember that C-3PO has been here since day one, and we need to show that and give him an arc, considering that Anthony Daniels is the last, main guy who was there since 77 that's partaking in these films. I mean, Mark Hamill's there for sure, but Mark Hamill wasn't around for the prequel trilogy. He didn't appear in those films. This was something that Anthony Daniels was in every single day and has built his career off of Star Wars. If it wasn't for Star Wars, he wouldn't be as famous and as known as he is now. And I think this is a nice little homage to him at the end of it all. So I'm interested to see what his role as C-3PO will do in Star Wars Episode 9. I'm going to be pissed if he fucking dies, though. Oh my god, that'll be a whole nother story. But it is going to be very interesting to see what C-3PO has to do in The Rise of Skywalker. And it's nice to get a little more information and kind of clarity on the situation of him with the prequels and the sequels. It's always nice to hear what the actors actually think about these things. It's stuff I'm more interested than the films sometimes, but it's one of the most interesting things about Star Wars, in my opinion, is not only the story that they tell in the films, but the story that goes in on making the films. I think that's a lot more personal and real, because it's something that we can look at and say, wow, that was such a struggle to make, and it came out to be one of the greatest franchises of all time, if not the greatest franchise of all time. But tell me your thoughts below about Anthony Daniels playing C-3PO, being disappointed with the past 6 films that he's been in. Is it 6? I mean, I don't know. I don't care. It's just basically the prequels and the sequels, except for Episode 9. So maybe it's just 5. But still, tell me your thoughts below about Anthony Daniels' comments on this stuff and what you think his role in The Rise of Skywalker is going to be. We know it's going to be a major one. Just don't know how it's going to go. Tell me your thoughts below. I'm Star Wars Only. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. I'll see y'all next time. And may the Force be with you always.